Hi everyone, I am Kristen Body. I'm the Membership and Events Manager here at the museum, and I want to thank you all for being here today for our member program that's being led by Lydia C., our curatorial fellow here at the museum, who will be speaking about the BMC Dreier collection. And I don't know much about this collection myself, so I'm really excited to hear from Lydia, and I hope you all are as well. She's been cataloging and interpreting over 400 documents given to the museum by the Dreier family, and if I'm not mistaken, she's not yet done. So if you have a question she can't answer today, I'm sure she'll be happy to get back to you. Before I turn this over to Lydia, I do just want to go over some of our general housekeeping for all the attendees. So first, your microphones are muted by default. We are recording today's program, so if you prefer not to be recorded, just make sure your video remains off. And you'll see a red line through the video camera symbol at the bottom left of your screen. And if you'd like to ask a question or comment, you can type it into the chat box, or you can use the raise hand feature and I can unmute you. I encourage you to ask questions as we go. Lydia will read them as we go along, and so will I, and she's hoping for some good conversation. And I'll send out an evaluation to all the attendees after this program is over. The information you provide through these evaluations are really important for us. They help us when applying for grants or reporting on programs. So please do just take a few minutes out of your day to complete it. We really appreciate it. And finally, as 2020 comes to an end, I'm so glad we can end on a hopeful note, as we know the vaccines are coming soon, but nonprofits like the museum can still use your help getting through the coming months. And as the holidays are coming, I hope you'll consider either renewing your membership or giving the gift of membership to a loved one. Through the end of the year, we do also have our COVID-19 Relief Fund and Matching Challenge, and all annual fund donations, membership upgrades, and new memberships will be matched dollar for dollar up to $75,000 by a longtime foundation supporter. So every dollar has double the impact, and we hope we can count on you for your support. And now I will turn this over to Lydia. Lydia, thanks for being here. I think you'll just need to unmute yourself, Lydia.
It's just the classic. We're all getting used to that. I heard somebody say the other day that they wish that one of the things that could continue on into the real world post our Zoom era is that folks could ask people to mute and unmute themselves at will. And I find that just kind of delightful. So hi, I'm Lydia C. I am the curatorial fellow at Asheville Art Museum right now. I'm also the director and founder of Engaging Collections. And I'm going to speak a little bit about my own work at the end, and also just talk about kind of the grand scope of Black Mountain College's collections in general, specifically about the Dreier collection, but also about how we have this impact, and the more we learn about Black Mountain College, the deeper we're able to go into the legacy and how exciting that is. I want to mention that the importance of interpreting these collections is, I'll talk more about this, but I also want to mention today, this is actually my second presentation of the day relating to Black Mountain College, and I'll share a little bit more about what I was speaking about earlier today. But the legacy is so deep and so rich, and there are so many opportunities and points of entry to get involved in the scholarship of Black Mountain College. It's a really lovely and deep legacy. So as Kristen said, I'm open to conversation, and there's a lot of information to cover, and so I imagine folks will have questions as we move along, and feel free to ask them. It might be useful to, if there's stuff I'm going to talk about, we might wait until we get to that point. So, but feel free to add stuff into the chat, and I'm just so delighted to be here. I identify as more of an artist than an art historian, and I identify as a maker, an artist, an educator, and a curator of art and archives. And I will talk a little bit about archival certification and the value of the profession. I am not a certified archivist, so my approach to working with archives is decidedly more based in my experience as a maker and educator. And I also want to mention that I am working and living on unceded Cherokee territory. I'm out in Western North Carolina, just west of Asheville. And I think it's really important to mention that many of us, most of us are on unceded territory. And I would encourage y'all to find out whose land you are occupying. We are indebted to the Cherokee people for, for having where we are right now. And I think it's really important to recognize that. So, all right. So we are talking about interpreting the Black Mountain College through the Dreier document collection, and we're also going to talk about contextualization on archival silences. So some basic overview on the Dreier documents, the credit line right here. It's important to recognize where the collection came from and the Dreier family and how really generous they've been with their materials, both with Asheville Art Museum as well as Western Regional Archives and a few other repositories. This collection was acquired in 2017. And as any Black Mountain College scholar or artist working in the legacy, we are all indebted to Miss Marianna Harris for her ongoing scholarship. And the museum has had a relationship with her for a long time. I think Marianna might be on the call. If you are, hello. Hi. So, it's just so neat to be both in the legacy of Black Mountain College, but also working alongside other great minds and researchers across time and space, all of whom have our own interpretations of the legacy. It's just a special place to be in communication and in community with you and with other folks who've spent a long time in their lives working on these materials. So the collection is in process, which means it's not fully accessioned, and we'll talk a little bit about that. And this fellowship that I'm a participant in is made possible through 2 grants. And the scope of the Dreier collection specifically is complementary and focused to the Lorna Blaine Halper collection, which the Asheville Art Museum is the steward of, as well as Western Regional Archives, which has a wealth of Black Mountain College material, and many other foundations and entities devoted to the individuals from Black Mountain College. So these are 2 examples of 2 items that have been accessioned into our collection. On the left is the program for The Ruse of Medusa by Eric Satie, which was produced at Black Mountain College in 1948. And on the right is the Black Mountain College logo, which was a companion to the statement designed by Joseph Albers in 1935. And these are 2 things that have been on view at the museum when it first opened back up after the renovation. And here's another really phenomenal object. I love looking at the warriors and post-warriors kind of propaganda pamphlets that were sent out. You can see how they are talking about the work that they've done and the work that they will do and asking for money. And it's this really lovely illustration. I love the, during the war, we expanded the farm, and there's a little drawing of the farm. So there's a bunch of really rich documents within this collection, and some are very visually, aesthetically appealing, such as this. A lot of them are quite dry, school bulletins and things like that. But one of the really remarkable things about looking through some of the documents that are maybe a little less aesthetically pleasing compared to this are that you start to learn a little bit more about the daily goings on of the college, and particularly referencing individuals that might not have made it into major exhibitions. Of course, the visual arts at Black Mountain College gets a lot more attention, but there are so many wonderful individuals who maybe didn't necessarily reach a certain level of wider acclaim that I'm starting to learn more about through looking through the bulletins, which is quite exciting. So what is an archive? Archives. So traditionally, an archive is a store of documents or artifacts that are primarily documentary in nature, primary source documents. That's kind of the most basic explanation. The verb to archive is to transfer records from where they originated into a repository. And you'll also hear that term used as a verb a lot when people talk about to archive something on the internet. And we are actually all archiving all the time when we use Instagram, Snapchat, Facebook. We are creating our own metadata archives. Also, materials created or received by a person in the conduct of their affairs. And then the important line here is preserved because of their enduring value. And we'll talk about value a lot in this conversation. But that the enduring value is identified, and that the documents are the evidence of the functions and responsibilities of the creator, and are able to be traced in terms of provenance and where they came from, so that the enduring value is also proven, that these are primary source documents that came from a person or a legacy that are intended to be preserved in perpetuity. Anything that ends up in an archives or in a museum collection means that those objects or artifacts or pieces of ephemera are agreed by the receiving institution to be cared for in perpetuity. So the enduring value philosophy is really important in that all of these objects, they're going to be cared for forever. And these repositories are agreeing to keep them forever, unless there's some sort of reason for them to be deaccessioned or discarded from the collection. And I think that that's really important to recognize, particularly as we talk about the ethics of documentation, how things end up in repositories and who decides what the enduring value is. So these images are from Western Regional Archives, which is a traditional archive. And on the left, you'll see a few students from the Warren Wilson Masters in Craft program in the stacks in the archives. Now, at Western Regional and at most archives, you don't actually get to go into this room or see these areas. You go into the front of the archives, you ask for particular records, and the archivists themselves will go back and pull out the boxes for you. But here's a little peek. This is actually the Black Mountain College section of Western Regional Archives. So what is an archivist, and what do archivists actually do? What's the function? So a professional with expertise in the management of records of enduring value. The most democratized definition is an individual responsible for records of enduring value, and that's what I consider myself. And then capitalized is usually the chief official responsible. So the archivist at Western Regional Archives, the archivist at the Library of Congress. Archivists are specially trained in preserving the material, helping people navigate and access material. Archivists work with paper documents, photographs, films, a lot of really fragile objects. And many begin their careers as historians and then end up getting further certification as archivists. I am not an archivist, as I mentioned. I'm not certified. I'm an artist archivist, and many people like me end up being involved in community-based archives or art archive initiatives. And I kind of have a little bit of a stake in democratizing the term archives, and that is not in any way meant to devalue the archival profession. Folks who spend years in school learning how to properly manage and handle these materials are certainly in a separate class, but I also recognize that amateur or lay archivists or artist archivists have a very valid place in the archival conversation as well. So this image, which Hillary Schroeder, one of the curators at Asheville Art Museum, helped me photograph this. And this is my hands holding a document using gloves. A lot of times you'll see folks using the white cotton gloves, and I go back and forth. Sometimes I find especially very fragile paper materials easier to handle with the plastic or rubber gloves instead, but often I'll have one white cotton glove and one plastic or Nero glove on the other hand, so I can toggle back and forth to whichever is the most reasonable for the document. This object that I'm holding is the Rollins College report that actually discusses John Andrew Rice was fired from Rollins College, which when he left among some of his collaborators, faculty and students from Rollins, that is actually what preceded the founding of Black Mountain College. So this report goes into detail about all of the offenses that caused him to be fired. So while it precedes the actual Black Mountain College legacy, many of these documents, most of them are from the time that Dreier was at Black Mountain College, but some precede and are also from after and help us understand the legacy. So Asheville Art Museum treats archival materials as art objects, and it's important to recognize the distinction between an archive at an art museum, and an art museum collection. And so what Asheville Art Museum is doing is kind of a hybrid where all of these archival materials are treated as art objects. They receive an accession number just like any other art object in the collection. And even though archives use accession numbers as well, the way that we are trying to organize our collections is a little bit different. And the distinction is important because I've been informed by the archives at Western Regional, as well as other archives, to try to look at how formal archives arrange and make available their primary document material using finding aids and databases, how art museum archives like Harvard Art Museum's archives, so they have kind of three separate, they have Harvard Art Museum Archives, and then the Harvard Archives, which are three separate but complementary entities. And so what I've tried to do is create a system of managing and negotiating our collections so that they can be usable and complementary. So an artist who's a lay researcher could use our Dreier document archive for artistic research without the barrier of access that I find some archives to be a little bit confusing for someone who's not familiar with the vernacular or navigating the spaces. So I'm trying to design our finding aid, which I'll talk about in a minute, to be both usable for lay researchers as well as palatable for formal archivists. So somebody who is an archivist, or if in the future the Asheville Art Museum decided to hire a full-time archivist, they would be able to look at the materials that I've generated and say, okay, this is good enough. I understand where this person was coming from. It's organized in a way that is navigable. It's maybe not best practices the way that an art museum archive would do it, but it is complementary to the scope of this collection and navigable for people of all types. And this image right here is from Western Regional, and it's actually one of the scrapbooks that Dreier made out of the things that were tacked up on the bulletin boards at Black Mountain College. There's two of these scrapbooks, and they're quite lovely objects. And there are these oversized documents or oversized books that have all these clippings inside. And some things are things like, I found a shoe, whose is it? Spaghetti will be for dinner tonight, and all sorts of other lovely things. And so what you can see here is the beginning of the structure of the finding aid that I've created, just the table of contents on the left. So you can see kind of the basic format that I'm working with. And then on the right is what you would find at Western Regional if you clicked on their Dreier documents finding aid. The descriptive summary, quick links within the series, the date scope of the time. You can see here 1925 to 68. So they have some objects which are from after and before Black Mountain College as well. And access and use citations, arrangement notes, and things like that. And all of those things will be included in ours as well. And then you can also see, this is a little more, I was going to take you all through the Western Regional website and show you. I can at the end drop a link to this page so you can easily find this finding aid. But you can see that the abstract has a very long scope of the collection. And then this entry on the right, the oversized materials, this is actually the entry for the scrapbook that I just showed you. And you can actually read the description of that. And many archives don't have all of their materials digitized. As you can imagine, it's a pretty big undertaking. So most archives, what you would do is you would look at the finding aid, identify the objects that you wish to see, reach out to the archivist and say, hey, I want to look at this thing. In non-COVID times, you would be able to go into the archive and they would pull that box out for you and bring it out to a table that is arranged for you. You can also always email folks and say, do you have a scan of this, or I'm interested in looking this. And archivists and librarians are usually so thrilled to engage with anybody, whether you're a lay researcher or somebody that doesn't understand the jargon, or you're somebody who's absolutely engaged in scholarly research. The scope is very wide, and folks are usually very willing to work with anybody and guide folks through. So the general workflow of the Dreier document collection, process all the objects into a spreadsheet, and I'll show you all an example of that. I promise I won't show too many spreadsheets. And I based our spreadsheet off of the prevailing spreadsheets that our registrar uses, with a few adaptations. Scanning all of the objects, and some, particularly the text-heavy objects like the bulletins, will have to be scanned through a process called OCR and or transcription, which makes, that's the function that allows PDFs to be readable for alternative reading methods for the vision impaired, and also alt text and things like that. So we want all of our typed documents to be able to be accessed by anybody eventually. Accession of all the scanned and processed objects into the database. We use Embark, just like we do with our art objects. Each object gets its own separate entry. While processing the collection, creating this finding aid that I just shared with you, using best practices as a guide. And that came from just some conversations that I had with archivists and art archivists. Cross-reference our finding aid with Western Regional and any other Black Mountain College related individual estates. So within our finding aid, there will be links to other places that have similar holdings. And that's, it's a practice to engage researchers in being able to look, kind of scattershot their research, but also make sure that if I have something in an archive that somebody else doesn't have and vice versa, that we're offering our materials across a wide scope of folks and researchers. And then while all of the above is occurring, I'm working on generating a timeline, and that timeline will allow us to cross-reference the art objects that the Asheville Art Museum has in our collection that relate to these documents. Also, eventually there will be an interactive timeline made available on the Asheville Art Museum website. And so a lot of the research that's occurring with my own fellowship, as well as several other fellows and interns who will be a part of this process in the next 1.5 to 2 years, we will be able to eventually have this timeline available on the website. So researchers will be able to click on 1948 and have a bunch of primary source archival documents, as well as any art holdings that the museum has that relates to that particular moment in time or that person, which is really exciting and doesn't really exist on the internet yet. So I'm hoping that the Asheville Art Museum ends up becoming the place to go to look for these things and to have a choose your own adventure experience with Black Mountain College. So these two documents are two of the documents that have been scanned, and you'll notice the color check. This is part of the digitization process that every document has to be scanned with a color check on it. So we're ensuring that we are preserving the integrity of what the object actually looks like. This is also a common practice for people who shot film. Usually the first image on the roll of film, even in a studio, would have someone holding a color check, and that just allows you to make sure that every image in that roll of film matches the proper color of light. So it's the same philosophy. And these two I pulled out because, so on the left, this is a concert from Summer Music Institute, and you'll see a few interesting points here. Tuesday, July 31st, Dr. Alfred Einstein will give a lecture illustrated by lantern slides on Mozart's handwriting. Now, that sounds amazing. I want to be there for that. I also just want to pull your attention to the date. This is late July 1945. And in August of 1945 and early August of 1945, the US dropped bombs on Hiroshima and Nagasaki. And so it is very likely that Dr. Einstein was either at Black Mountain College or traveling from Black Mountain College to wherever his next destination was while we were engaged in that. And I think that one of the things that struck me so much while I'm looking through these documents is all of the things that were happening in the world outside of Black Mountain College at a time where communication was fairly disconnected because of the rural nature of Black Mountain College. So in that interactive timeline, there will be moments where we are drawing attention to the things that were occurring around the same time. And I think it's important to remember where and when we are in history when we look at these things. Another important thing that I want to pull out is Saturday, August 4th, Roland Hayes, tenor, will give his only recital with his accompanist, Reginald Boardman. And I'll talk a little bit more about Roland Hayes later on. I didn't know very much about him before I started doing this research, and I have fallen into a Roland Hayes rabbit hole and spent some time trying to get to know him and his story. And we'll talk about that a little bit later. And then on the right, you see the dance program from June 10th in 1950. This was a kind of cross-disciplinary movement and sound workshop. And You'll also notice, I think that it's quite lovely that the participants are only listed by first name, and there's a few really sweet things like hist whist. Vera was dancing to a reading of an E.E. Cummings poem, and I'm an E.E. Cummings fan. So it's both that I'm finding things that are of interest globally as well as specifically to Black Mountain College, but also these really lovely nuanced notes of things that also connect to my life and that I'm noticing connect to the global cultural scene, you know, the world as a whole. It's quite lovely. And both of these will end up in an exhibit at the Knoxville Museum of Art that Hillary curated, as well as the program on the left we have 2 copies of, and that will end up in the exhibit that I'm putting together, which will open in the Van Winkle Gallery at Asheville Art Museum in January. And there will be lots of primary source documents as well as objects from the collection in that. So this is the spreadsheet. I won't talk about it too much, but I just want y'all to see, and I know the type is tiny so you can see, but generally I'm using the same format, but instead of the artist's name, I'm including all of the individuals who were performing in this thing, because the BMC print shop technically is the artist for this object. They printed it, but we don't know who actually printed it, and it's more important to know whose legacies are contained in the objects. And then there's some color coding, and then there's room for further research, as well as it's really important, particularly with ephemeral documents, to note the description of the state of the object itself. So if there's creases or folding, or in some cases there's foxing, which is like a light brown staining that happens on paper. So those things are important to note, so there can be a condition report over time, but also if we have multiple copies of a particular object, and we are, in the case of the Knoxville Museum of Art show, we're sending a few documents. We want to make sure that we're sending the document that's in the best shape, that's okay to travel and all of that. So we're going to go back to this program. So this is a very iconic moment in Black Mountain College history. And the Ruse of the Medusa, we'll talk about a few people who show up in this performance. One of whom is Ruth Asawa, actually was in charge of the bell prop. And here's a lovely photograph of Ruth, which is by Hazel Urson Archer. And I think this is just such a joyful, beautiful picture of her. And so this is an example of how an archival document, a primary source, can be used to help interpret objects in our collection and vice versa. So if we were doing a Ruth Asawa show, we might include the Ruse of the Medusa, because she worked on that production. And the other way around, if we're doing an ephemera exhibit, we might include the Hazel Larson Archer image of Ruth to connect it to the rest of our collection. So there's a few other folks that come up in this. We've got, here's an image from the production itself. And you see on the left, Buckminster Fuller holding hands with Elaine de Kooning. And then in the background is Merce Cunningham. And so again, you might end up having folks show up kind of in multiple places in our collection, and the primary documents are able to help us interpret those further. So then here is, and something of interest here is the photograph is made by Clemens Kalischer. Clemens Kalischer is not in the production. So the primary source document is not made by these artists. This photograph is not made by these artists, but they appear in both. And the same thing for this photograph, not made by Buckminster Fuller, but depicting Buckminster Fuller's work. And this image is also in our collection. So the way that these primary documents kind of span across all sorts of different gestures of interpretation can be really valuable. And then here's a question. So I'm going to talk a little bit more about the ethics of interpretation within the archival world. So on the right, about halfway down, you can maybe see the type is very small. 1415 and Round Dance, which was danced by Tim, set to music by Bartok, and played by Joe. No last name. Now, the little that I know about Joe Fiore from doing research about him is that he was classically trained on the piano as a child. So it's entirely possible that the Joe who's playing piano for this dance movement was Joe Fiore, who made the beautiful watercolor that you see on the left. But I have to do a lot more research, and it's likely that I will not be able to present as fact that that is Joe Fiore. So it's my responsibility as an artist archivist to maybe include this as a suggestion or a question or in an interpretive way, but never to actually prescribe or editorialize when I find information that might provide a connection, unless I have primary source documents to back everything up. And as we talk more about the ethics of archival practice, you'll see why this can actually propose issues. And in the past, archivists always try to be as democratic and research-based as possible, but everybody has a lens. Everybody sees the world. We don't see the world as the world is. We see the world as we are. And so there's a certain degree of connections that are made, sometimes unintentionally so, that can actually end up causing maybe moderate truths or untruths to then become part of the way a story is told. So again, I don't know if this is Joe Fiore, but I think it's really neat that there's a possibility that the person who came to Black Mountain as a student, ended up as an instructor, painted this beautiful picture, and also might have participated in a performative aspect at Black Mountain College, which BMC was all about cross-pollination, right? So these are some of the books that I regularly use in my research, and then there's a bunch more that I have next to me here that I can show that aren't in this image. Of course, at the top, The Arts at Black Mountain College by Marianna Harris, many consider to be kind of like the Bible to start with if you really want a good foundation. Some of my other favorites here, obviously the Black Mountain College exhibition catalog, and that was organized by the ICA Boston, and Helen Molesworth and Ruth Erickson organized that exhibition and also the catalog. And many of our favorite BMC people are also featured in research and writing in the book, and it's an encyclopedia. It's quite incredible. Sprouted Seeds, directly below that, is a collection of first-person accounts from individuals who were at Black Mountain College. That's out of print and it's kind of hard to find, but the museum does have a copy of it. And then some other really wonderful books, Not Nothing on Ray Johnson. Begin to See was a great exhibition at Black Mountain College Museum and Arts Center, on the photographers at Black Mountain College. Everything She Touched, a newish book about Ruth Asawa that Asheville Art Museum actually did a program with Marilyn Chase that I think is up on the YouTube and is really exciting to watch. If you want kind of a gossipy take on Black Mountain College, the Fielding Dawson book is a great thing to look at. It's quite, it's very personal, as well as the Michael Rumaker memoir as well, that's not pictured. The Duberman book is a really great, if you want to kind of read a long narrative of the college with a lot of primary source documents and some editorializing. And really, I mean, there are so many resources. Also, the Hazel Larson Archer catalog that you see at the bottom here is one of my favorites. That was also an exhibition organized by Black Mountain College Museum and Art Center. And there's an essay in there about Hazel, written by her daughter, Erica Zaro, about Hazel using what she learned from Joseph Albers in the Matier classes and then applying that to her photography pedagogy, and how his influence on her really affected the way that she ended up teaching. So, oh wow, I'm gonna check in really quick and that, thank you. Yes, we're going to talk more about, it is Joe. Oh, Marianna said, okay, Albert Einstein is not Albert. A few decades ago, I had the same problem. Okay, and yeah, the scrapbook. Okay, so the scrapbook ended up in the Dreier collection at Western Regional, but it was made by Robert Wunsch. Thank you. And Alfred Einstein is not Albert. Okay, thank you. See, this is how rumors get started. It's so cool that you reinforce the Joe Fiore thing, though. Thank you. That's really exciting. Oh, I'm so excited. Okay. So rumors get started, but also you get the answers to some of your questions. Thank you, Marianna. And another thing I wanted to mention too about primary sources and documents and stuff. So every once in a while you can find like Black Mountain College people in unexpected places. I was getting on an airplane maybe 10 years ago and I saw this copy of Esopus magazine, and it has this whole feature on Ray Johnson and his correspondence practice. And it's got all of these cool like fold out pieces and things. So there's a wealth of Black Mountain College legacy out in the world. And I find Black Mountain College wherever I go, and it feels like I'm bumping into an old friend whenever that happens. And it's just quite a lovely legacy to be part of. So going back to the big ethical questions. So I want to address a few things about who defines and interprets what's considered records of enduring value. We've talked a little bit about that, and we'll keep talking about that. How are records which contain complicated, uncomfortable, or traumatic materials contextualized over time? How can the archival and museum fields become more diverse? And how could wider representation within the archival profession have a symbiotic effect? And that is, the museum world and the archives world are overwhelmingly white and have been. There are intentional actions around diversifying the field right now. And part of the necessity of that is that when you have people with a very similar academic background and a very similar upbringing interpreting these materials, as I mentioned before, everybody has their own individual lens. And so if you are speaking to or working with materials that you are used to viewing within your own particular lens, you're going to continue to run up against the same stories or the same descriptions of how stories occurred. Whereas the more diverse the individuals processing the materials are, means that the perspective brought to that collection becomes much more multifaceted, and often lived experiences end up being able to inform certain aspects of the interpretation. And so the Society of American Archivists is making some big pushes in that direction. And also just acknowledging that archives have historically been upheld by white supremacy. So the things that we collect, if you go into your local library special collections room, you will often encounter 80, 90, 95% materials by white people or within the legacy of white people, usually white people of standing. And part of that is a trust issue. There are many individuals of color who, and I'll talk a little bit about my own work later, but who have expressed a distrust for archival collections. How do I know that my materials are going to be stewarded with respect? How do I know that my materials are going to be treated with the same level of respect as, say, somebody that a street is named after in my town, right? So, this is a lot of text, and y'all are welcome to read it. I'll pull out a few things, but this is all taken from the Society of American Archivists core values statement and code of ethics. And I think that it's really important to recognize that archivists should strive to make access wider and create usage opportunities for users of archival records. And it's also important to cultivate collaborative opportunities. I love the way that they say, not only with the creators, users, and colleagues, but with any interested parties. So as I was saying before, archivists and librarians are usually thrilled to communicate with folks who are outside of the archival profession and make material and language as accessible and available as possible. Archivists are also responsible for recognizing the importance of professional education and development over time as things change, particularly with the more information that ends up in archives that was born digital. So rather than a scan of a primary document as a digital artifact, things like metadata from an Instagram account and or digital photographs that have never actually been made into a print, those are all born digital artifacts. And also create mentorship opportunities for library school students. And this is where we get into the diversifying the field. It's really important to intentionally develop young people who are interested in this line of work who maybe don't come from the same traditional background that a lot of librarians and archivists have come from educationally or in their lived experience. And I think that this note down at the bottom is quite lovely. Most archivists are committed to incorporating these ethical and core values into their work, but SAA and a lot of archivists recognize that not everybody is committed to abiding by these values. And so as archives and archival practices evolve, we have to recognize that they are really never neutral. This is the lens that I'm talking about. No matter how hard registrars or archivists or librarians intend to be as neutral as possible, we are always filtering everything through our own lived experience. Acknowledging this as SAA, as the prevailing professional institution for archivists in the United States, just naming this goes so far into democratizing access. And I think it's really special. So here are some of the individuals of color who are part of the Black Mountain College legacy. And as I mentioned before, one of the really exciting things about the primary documents in the Dreier collection is that there are a lot of names that I don't know or I've only heard mentioned in passing. Now, these folks are among the more famous or well-known: Ruth Asawa, Ora Williams, Mary Parks Washington, and Gwendolyn Knight and Jacob Lawrence. I love the photo of them on the right. I think that's just so majestic and beautiful. So these are more household names, particularly recently. These are some folks that are less household names. Dolores Fullman, who I've read some accounts that she and Rauschenberg were favorite dance partners. And then we have Cornelia Williams in the center, who was a cook at the college, and Hazel Larson Archer on the right, who became the first photography instructor, who was also an individual who was differently abled. And she took all three of these gorgeous photographs. Her photographs are absolutely exquisite. And she's relatively unknown outside of Black Mountain College circles. There have been a few exhibitions celebrating her work, and Black Mountain College Museum and Art Center is the steward of her estate. So they have a lot of her work. We have a lot of her work in our collection, but she's pretty widely less known. And I included Cornelia here because as I'm learning more about the college and finding a lot of names that I don't know, I'm realizing that in the conversations about integrating Black Mountain College, which I'm going to talk about in a second, there are a lot of conversations about integration, and there's not a lot of mention of the function of keeping the college going, much of which was done because of the labor of people of color, and also because of the labor of the faculty and students who worked on the campus. But often in the stories about Black Mountain College, the work program is discussed at length, that students and faculty participated in the building of the Lake Eden campus and doing a lot of the work. But I wouldn't say that there's erasure of Cornelia Williams and her husband, but maybe unintentional omission of folks like her. And then here are a few other folks who I've recently started to get to know a little bit. Carol Bryce on the left was a vocalist who was at Black Mountain College for one of the Summer Music Institutes in 1945. Sylvester Martin, who's the not pictured space in the middle, I have yet to find a photograph of her. Mark Oakland Fox, who is an instructor of music, and then Percy H. Baker on the right, who was at the college for the fall of 1945 as a biology instructor. And then here is Roland Hayes, who, as I said, I've fallen in love with. Now, this is where the conversation about editorializing comes in, right? So I've found a few photographs recently that are Roland Hayes at Black Mountain College. I found one of him performing at Black Mountain College, which I actually have in the catalog from the ICA. But his accompanist, who, Reginald Boardman, I have yet to find a photograph of Reginald Boardman. Now, the photograph I have of him performing at Black Mountain College has a piano player in it, so I assume it's Reginald Boardman, but I can't find any decisive information. So this image I found in the Detroit Public Library digital collections, and it's Roland Hayes with an unknown accompanist in the Scurlock studio, which is a Black-run music studio was in the 40s. And so I started to get to know Roland, and I went down a Roland rabbit hole. And here you see Roland Hayes with another accompanist. You also see Roland Hayes with two unnamed men, and these are all from the Detroit digital collections. And I started to look into him. It is Boardman in the BMC concert. Okay, great, yeah. So, but again, in the caption, so Marianna, I'm glad that you said that. In the caption in the book, and I'll show you all this, I meant to make a scan of it and I apologize, but so this is the image that we're talking about. But in the book, it just says Roland Hayes in concert. And so in order to definitively say that is Boardman, another thing with Boardman is that some accounts, he recorded many records with Roland Hayes, and in some accounts his name is spelled B-O-R-D, and some accounts it's B-O-A-R-D, so it makes some of the research a little tenuous, right? But then also, many archives require that the caption that you use for their images is the caption that the archivists have written, which they are careful to not interpret or editorialize past the point of fact. So while we might believe that that's Boardman in the image, unless the archive or, you know, if Marianna has proof or something, then we can message the archive and we can say, hey, we discovered this and here's all this interpretive information, which leads me to my next image. So in that Detroit Public Library digital collection, I found this incredible image. So here's Roland right here. And this is his daughter, Africa, which isn't noted in the caption, but I found another image of them at Black Mountain College with his wife and daughter. And that's also in the ICA catalog. So you can see that that's Africa, A-F-R-I-K-A is her name, and Roland right there. Now, we as Black Mountain College researchers, we might recognize some of the individuals on the right. And I imagine Marianna might be able to recognize some of the individuals on the right of this image. But the Detroit Public Library collection that is the steward of this image, they might not be Black Mountain College people. They might be music people or Roland Hayes people. So this is their caption for this image. And the only reason they know it's Black Mountain College is because written on the back, it says Black Mountain College, North Carolina. Now, metadata for born digital things makes these things way easier now. So every time you take a picture with your iPhone stores the location. So if you were to deed your collection to special collections at the end of your life, anything you took with your iPhone is gonna tell the special collections where it was photographed. Even if you don't see that metadata, it's there. Librarians and archivists thank every day silently for when somebody's auntie wrote delicately in cursive in pencil on the back of a photograph telling us who's there. It is the way that many deep archival rabbit holes are, if not solved, are at the very least given a new through line of research. And this image is just so lovely. And so as I continue to do more research, I'm going to get in touch with the Detroit Public Library, and then Marianna is gonna ID everyone except for the woman next to Albers, right? And also just what a statuesque person too. I mean, come on, those outfits. But so we might be able to say, hey, we've figured out who all these people are. Would you like to add this information into your caption description of this image so future researchers are able to benefit from our Black Mountain College related addition to this? And so this is essentially, is talking about the integration at Black Mountain College. And depending on who you talk to, this primary document on the right is attributed to Rice. It's in the Rice collection at App State. And some of the context with this paper is a little bit editorialized for my taste. What Rice seems to be discussing here are the thought processes behind to integrate or not to integrate. And many people could see that as racist. Many people could see that as problematic. what we also have to remember is that what was going on in North Carolina in the 40s, it was an inhospitable environment in some areas for people of color. And so, you know, it's important to recognize that there's a lot of other context in there that we don't know. So, all right, I just realized we're running short on time. So I'm gonna go forward. So my work, my scholarship in Black Mountain College, one of the things that I was presenting about this morning is Black Mountain College Playbook, which is a workshop and a deck of generative cards that I'm working on, that each of the cards has a prompt on the back, and I'm able to run workshops with folks, but also that folks would be able to take these cards back to their studio and use them as a generative thing to do when you're experiencing artist's block. And each of the cards is about a Black Mountain College artist, and some of them are meant to be combined. So for instance, the Hazel Larson Archer card says, you can do the prompt on this card, or you can combine Hazel Larson Archer with Joseph Albers because she was influenced by him. And so it's kind of a choose your own adventure art project card system. And then my other work is engaging collections. I do a lot of work around archival representation in libraries, archives, and special collections through artist residencies and a publication. This is our website right here. And this is actually the Sondley room in the original Pack Library, which is now the library at Asheville Art Museum. And the Sondley collection was founded by a gentleman who deeded his work to the Pack Library under the stipulation that his materials were only to be used for white non-smoking men. And so through the last few months, the Pack Library Buncombe County Special Collections has been doing a series of history harvests with the Black community in Asheville, collecting images to add a more diverse perspective to their permanent collections. Right here is an image of Cliff Cotton III, who is the grandson of Pearson, who was a Black entrepreneur and community member in Asheville, and with his auntie on the Blue Ridge Parkway. We have thousands of images of white people on the Blue Ridge Parkway, and this is the first time that I've seen an image of a person of color posing on the Blue Ridge Parkway. So we are Catherine Calhoun Cutshaw, and oh, this is outside the Orange Peel in downtown Asheville as well, when it was a bowling alley. So we're unearthing some of these really remarkable materials. Catherine Calhoun Cutshaw, who you see on the right, is the lead archivist and librarian in charge of the Buncombe County Special Collections. And then Honey Simone in the middle is our resident artist, and we are in the process of revitalizing that collection right now. And the point is that everyone is an archivist, okay? Everybody has their own archive, whether it's the stuff under your bed from your grandmother or your Instagram feed, everyone is an archivist. And our mission through Engaging Collections is to ensure that people who are underrepresented in history classrooms and history books, underrepresented in collections and legacies, are able to have agency with how their stories and legacies are preserved, and that they can rewrite and carve out their space in history. And that's Honey Simone in the middle of that photograph right there, our resident artist as well. And so I believe everyone is an archivist, and I am thrilled to be processing the Dreier collection with the perspective of someone who honors the archival collection philosophy and the value of trained archivists, but also through the lens of an artist and someone who's a practicing educator and who believes that these materials should be democratized and made available to everyone. And that's it. This is all my info, and I hope that y'all will keep in touch. And I know I talked for a long time, but I would love to hear questions and feedback and anything that y'all would like to talk about.
Thank you, Lydia. I will read some questions that did come in. The first one is from Laurel, and she had written this when you were talking about the use of protective gloves. And she wanted to know if there are any other precautions you take to protect the documents. And she gave the example of certain lighting.
Oh yeah, certainly. So archives, subdued lighting, you know, usually it's fluorescent, but same thing with a vault for art storage, temperature control, humidity control. Anytime you're viewing documents, if you're taking them out of a box, you put down paper that, you know, archival paper on the desk, so you're not having any contact with any surfaces that might have surface oils, or any, you know, like a table that is made of wood might have a tiny splinter that you don't see, things like that. there's also a process of, if you remove something from a file, you put a little card bookmark there that shows where the document was removed from, particularly in collections that are very specifically arranged. You want to make sure you're returning everything to the same spot. And then just an abundance of caution when you're handling things. You handle one thing at a time. You don't leave things out while you're looking at other things. I tie my hair back because I have wild hair and I don't want my hair to end up in the stacks. All sorts of anything that you would think about when you're touching a work of art, or like a baby that has just been born, you know, and you want to be very gentle with everything and not leave anything of yourself, skin oils or anything like that on the objects.
Perfect. And then Judy had written a question that, and it was when you were speaking about Joseph Fiore, and Marianna had confirmed that it was in fact Joe Fiore, but I think Judy was kind of asking more about the ethics of you having to kind of suggest that that was Joe Fiore, who was playing the piano during that concert, as you wait for confirmation. So maybe you could just elaborate on that a little bit.
So internally on that big database that I showed you, that's where I would put any questions or needs for further research. I would say, you know, number one, follow up with Marianna, because, you know, that might be something that Marianna just knows. Number two, call Heather South at Western Regional Archives and see if she has any sort of further proof. Number three, so there's a kind of a system of checks and balances designed to ensure that no assumptions are being made publicly, and that information is not included in any sort of so that wouldn't be on the finding aid, that would be on the internal research. If/when there's some sort of primary source confirmation that something that you've suspected is true, at that point, that's when it would go into the finding aid, and there might be intentionally in our finding aid, I want it to be a linkable PDF. So you would see the line for that dance program, and then there'd be a link underneath it that says, you know, link to the Joe Fiore work of art, link to Pete Jenner-John's, something else we have in the collection, so that there's a direct, you've seen this thing, and now here are the other people who are referenced in it and the objects that we have in the collection that are representative of them. But you're totally right in terms of never publicly disclosing anything that you suspect until you have primary source material. And again, primary sources for Black Mountain College, a lot of it comes from people who were there and are speaking from their own lived experience and memories. And then often, as in the case with Marianna and a lot of the oral history interviews that we have, we're drawing these conclusions based on somebody's recollection of it, and sometimes then filtered through other people. So archives in general and primary sources in general, it's always important to remember that we are always going to interpret things based on our own lens, based on how we've been exposed to particular sources of information. And I don't mean to say take things with a grain of salt, but remember that everybody's human. And as ethical as an archivist or an artist archivist or a curator attempts to be, there are almost always questions, and it's our job to ensure that we share the questions if they are there. We suspect or we need more information, but that we never present that material as evidence unless we have evidence towards that.
Great. And then one last thing, remind us when this exhibition will be up in the Van Winkle Gallery here at the museum.
Certainly, yeah, it'll be opening mid-January, and it will have a lot of primary source documents from the Dreier collection, and then some objects from our collection, like a Hazel Larson Archer image of Ruth Asawa, so that we can do that thing that I was presenting where you are interpreting artworks and primary source documents in the same space, and you're able to draw those connections between the materials and the history and the legacy, and how those stories ended up in the tangible form of art that we all get to appreciate and experience together.
Great. Great. Well, I'm looking forward to that. So thank you, Lydia. This was really interesting, a new way to look at all of these documents and everything the museum has in its collection. We do have art, but we also have these wonderful pieces of ephemera and documents and everything that can, you know, reveal new things to us that we didn't know before. Thank you to our members for joining today. We are open. I hope you guys come by this Thursday. We're going to have some music in the galleries for you. It should be really great as you walk around. And I hope you all stay safe and well, and we'll see you for our next member program, hopefully, which is next week on December 16th. All right. Bye, everyone.